Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Rose with Realty ONE Group in Payson, Arizona. I want to welcome you to the talk show this morning. We have a very special guest whom I will introduce in just a moment. But before I do, please share this show, like it, comment. If you have a question, please interject. We may or may not have time for questions today. We'll see what happens. But I want to thank Cameron Davis of Brisbane Media for being behind the camera. So we're going to start off today by introducing someone that is quickly rising to fame. His name is Kyle Seraphin. He is a suspended FBI agent, and we are very fortunate to have you. So welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks for having me on. I like your space here.
Thank you.
We're very cozy right now. Yeah. I got a cup of coffee with my initials on it.
Yeah, we got coffee. We've got whiskey. No, we don't have whiskey.
It's early.
It's way too early. And we have this opportunity to talk to you. What has being an FBI agent cost you, and why did it cost you?
So being an FBI agent up front was actually a financial boon. It was probably the best paying job that I had, and it was something I always wanted to do, so that was great. It was a little uncomfortable. My wife and I had to move outside of DC, which we didn't necessarily want to do. We actually picked that. We had the ill-advised choice of saying we wanted to be in between both of our parents. My parents were down in Florida and hers were up in Connecticut, so we thought, what's a terrible place to live? Washington, D.C., so we lived in Northern Virginia. All that was kind of going well. And the funny thing is everybody has this one kind of impression of what the FBI looks like. And it's very different than what it actually is. Everybody thinks you're going to go out there and run down bad guys and catch bank robbers and kidnappers and fly around on a G5 jet with your team of loyal companions who are going to go and profile local crimes. We don't do local crimes. We do, big investigations into really boring stuff a lot of times. And a huge chunk of the FBI is actually doing counterintelligence and counterterrorism work, which are intelligence investigations. There's no criminal charges at all. And so I guess the first thing that I would say the FBI cost me was my faith in the government, which is a really expensive thing to have.
Hey, you're not the only one.
Well, so many of us have, but the sad thing is the people that sign up for the Bureau are the kind of people that believe that you can do something well, that you can do something good.
Yeah.
And so they show up for that, and they're immediately disillusioned by that sort of thing, I think, the people that come with the same kind of mindset I do. People who are former cops, people who've served in the military like I did, you sign up with a certain idea because you believe in America, and maybe in America that's not there anymore. And so anyway, that was the first thing, and then it led me to whistleblower activity, which I think is where we were kind of leading it to, and that cost me my paycheck, my home, my ability to tell my children where we were going to live next, and a lot of our sort of creature comforts. We're long on love right now. We're surrounded by family, but my family's in pretty tight quarters. We have two 10 by 12 rooms that we live in with a family of 5 and a dog, and that's suboptimal for most people. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we're still really blessed because nobody's taking our freedom. Nobody's able to stop us from doing what we think is right. So that's really special. Not a lot of people would necessarily step into that world voluntarily. And yet, what other choice do you have?
So why did they suspend you? And that's one question. And the second one is, when the FBI suspended you, do you still get paid?
No, you don't get paid. So I stopped getting paid in June of last year. So there's the real story of what happened, and then there's the story that they have perpetrated or attempted to sell. So the real story is that in September of 2021, I had a conscientious objection as a religious person to the COVID vaccine shots. I said no gracias, and because I lived in New Mexico, that's how you say it there.
No gracias.
and I had I had COVID in 2020 when I was on duty, and that was actually documented. The Bureau knew that. And so when they did this mandate, this is the executive order that Joe Biden's administration put down, said everybody's got to go get it. I immediately signed up on, I think, September 22nd of 21 and said, here's my objections. It was a full sheet. I'm a practicing Catholic, and so no thank you. Pro-life concerns. I have some medical concerns as well, but that's not what I was primarily noting to the Bureau. And for people's background, I was a paramedic in the Air Force, so at the time this happened, I'd been a paramedic for over a decade. I've done thousands of nasal swabs. I've treated patients in every type of things you can imagine, because not only did I work in an ambulance, I also worked in a hospital, in an emergency room, as they call them, like a paramedic technician. Okay. So I worked alongside nurses. I have a fairly good, and I'm relatively intelligent, so I have a pretty good grasp of medical information. So I looked at this and I went, no thank you. Almost simultaneous to that, the next month, in October of 2021, I got an email that wasn't sent to me, but it was forwarded to me by one of my colleagues that said that the FBI was creating a new threat tag, And people can think of a threat tag as like a hashtag for identifying certain types of intelligence in our system, so that when you go search for this threat tag, you'll pull up all the investigations and associated files with it. And the threat tag was EDU officials. It's now become famous because Jim Jordan's committee went out and talked about it. And what they said was, we're going to be looking into parents at school board meetings. Now, they didn't say it in those words, and Attorney General Garland has argued against it. But that's what the FBI does. They do investigations. And another whistleblower, so I sent this on to Jim Jordan's office via Yvette Harrell, who was my representative. And another whistleblower looked into this, someone that I'm friends with, whose name is public as of yesterday. And his name is Garrett O'Boyle, and he's a wonderful guy. He was also a former military member, a local cop, and an FBI agent. So he went and dug up that threat tag and found out that there were dozens of investigations into, you're never going to believe it, parents at school board meetings who pissed off the wrong person. And when that happened, they were reported to the FBI under dubious circumstances. And so there were investigations into them. FBI agents went to their house, interviewed them, and so on. So this was a legitimate allegation that I made, which was that the Attorney General probably lied under oath. That was my allegation. And that started a whole cascade of stupidity. Now, what they ended up kicking me out the door for was that I was out shooting in public land. So people in Arizona will know there's public land, BLM properties, and Department of Interior. I was out doing that, training as an FBI agent with a handgun, which is probably what you want your FBI agents to be able to do.
Absolutely.
And I'm a pretty decent shot. So at the time that they came up and this cop came up and talked to me, I was doing handgun draws from my holster and hitting steel torso targets at 50 yards because I trained my handgun out to 100 yards. Because I think that's important. I just think you should be good at your skill set. So cop comes up, talks to me, drives away. The FBI ends up suspending me over being unprofessional to a police officer. And because I'm a transparency guy, I posted the body cam footage. I went and got it from the city. It's on my Rumble channel. People can search my name and find it. And they can make up their own mind whether or not I was unprofessional. Because he drove off and said, no report. And then left.
No report.
No report. 10-8, which is going back into service. No report. Very easy.
And the FBI doesn't want to undo this?
No, they recharged me with a second charge, which was that I was adversarial to their investigators, which I was, to be fair, because I don't like being investigated for something that's not a crime. I'm a big Second Amendment rights kind of guy.
Sure.
I kind of believe in the whole Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. It's a big thing to me. That's what I swore my
and
life to.
And to most Americans, by the way.
It turns out it should be, right? So the question is what are you going to stand for? And I was standing out there, shooting on this patch of desert in the middle of New Mexico. The closest building to me was a school, and it was 865 yards behind me through a bunch of desert and berms and terrain and so on. And so in New Mexico, you have to be 150 yards away from an occupied structure to be able to shoot on public land. So I was that in spades. The cop told me he didn't even know the law. But when I was standing there, I was shooting, I see the police car drive up, right? And my first thought was, he's going to ask me to leave. And if an FBI agent who has federal authorities to carry a weapon and to train, who's within state law and doing something he's legally allowed to do in a place that he's legally allowed to do it, can be told by a local police department, you can't do this, then nobody can do it, right? Because I have a broader authority set, and I'm not trying to be arrogant about it. I was trying to be really polite. And in fact, at one point I said, look, I'm not trying to cause a problem for you, but I can't do what you're asking me to do. And it wasn't for me, because it doesn't matter where I go shoot. I can go shoot anywhere. I can go to a range. But I've got neighbors that shot there every day too. And like we were standing on like 1,000 shotgun shells, because people go shoot in the place I was at all the time. Sure. This was a local place where people shot in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So he admits it even on the body cam. He goes, oh, I know, I hear people shooting here every day. And you're like, guy, what are we doing? Like, why are we having this conversation? This is silly. So I said no, not for me necessarily, but because I believe that the Second Amendment shouldn't be infringed. And he didn't have the legal authority to ask me. And he politely asked, and I politely declined. And that should be the end of it. Now, to lose your job over that, I'll do that every day. 10 times out of 10. I wouldn't make this a different decision, even though it cost me my job. Because they were going to find something else one way or another.
Right.
But that's the thing. If we're not willing to stand up for our own rights, and so many people are willing to roll over, well, it's more convenient to do this. It's not acceptable.
I agree.
I hope people learn that in 2020.
Well, and I say this all the time, like when is enough going to be enough? And, using your voice is a good thing, but it's the whole entity of our government has overstepped their bounds, and people are now getting discouraged. So what would you say to any American, but also rural Americans who have kind of lost hope? Because everywhere we look, we're silenced. They're targeting conservatives. They're breaking laws,
Right.
and they're creating stories that absolutely aren't true. The justice system is broken because there's a lot of corruption. The corruption has put its tentacles in just about every aspect of our lives. So what would you say to any American that is discouraged? Where can they find hope?
So first of all, I think most people have to realize that you probably shouldn't be hoping in this world. Most of my friends that are motivated to do things just say, look, I'm living in this world, but not for this world. That's been a common theme through FBI whistleblowers that I'm dealing with. They're all, quote unquote, unvaccinated, not to any other childhood vaccines that they grew up with, but they're unvaccinated against COVID because they didn't like the way that went down. And they don't like being told what to do. But the second thing is they're all Christians.
Yes.
Of some variety, right?
Yes.
And like I said, I grew up practicing as a Catholic. I think that all Christians share a common ethos, which is a pro-life live. Most of this country, the vast majority of this country, whether they practice it anymore or not, have learned values that are Western, which is to say the individual worth of the human being, and that that you own your works and your deeds, and you should have personal responsibility. These are all Christian ideas.
Yes.
And what's even funnier, and I think this is the funniest, because when people look around, they go, look, the Marxists are winning, the secular leftists are winning, they have all these sort of communist ideas, these totalitarians. They can't even exist without a Christian base. Because when I talk to my father-in-law, who is essentially like a communist and lives in New York City his whole life, and he thinks that, Christianity is awful, and all religions are awful. Here's what's really funny. What do they believe in? The value of the poor, the value of the individual. Like, where do you think that came from? There's no religious practice in history until, the AD, right?
After death, yeah.
Until you got past the death of Christ, you didn't have people looking at individuals, and especially poor individuals and the sick and so on, and saying that there was individual value there. Everybody else always said, well, God doesn't favor them. That's the natural inclination for almost all human history. It's just really interesting. That's the first piece. So one, we're not living for here. There's nothing that says God, there's no biblical thing that says America survives.
Right.
So that's part one.
That's true.
So if you want to be, I'm always one of these guys, there's a story, it's maybe an allegory or something like that. It's like, pray to God, but row for the shore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do your part.
Yes.
So what's our part look like?
Yes.
Right? That's the question.
Yes.
So first you have to have a reason for your actions. And I think that's the reason for action. That's the commander's intent, which the military would talk about. And then the next piece of it is like, what are your actual actions? So I think these are the actions. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of laser red dots that we're chasing around like cats. Various corruptions. There's a lot of distractions. So what do we need to be doing? Number one is personal. Everybody's got to figure out what their line in the sand is. Draw it, don't ever retreat beyond it. Know where it is, set your feet, and then don't take anything backwards. So I think people realize they didn't have that line in the sand in 2020 and parts of 2021. They didn't have that firm set where they were like, this is the line that I will not cross. But more and more people are looking around and going like, okay, I may have lost that line, but I'm drawing a line. I'm either going to fight towards it and then get in front of it, or I'm drawing a line here and this is the end of it for me. This is the last hill. And if people don't know that they're on the last hill, then they're going to be in a bad spot. So that's number one. You got to know where you are. There's an expression in law enforcement about action always beats reaction. If you're waiting to react to somebody else doing to you, you can't be prepared for what's coming. If you've already decided what your actions are and you're just going to wait for it to happen, you've already made an action. You've decided. So that's part one. And then the second thing is they got to get involved locally. That's county sheriffs. They need to know what you feel, and they need to know what your values are, and they need to serve you. Your local city councils and things like that, or your town councils, they all need to be on the right page with you. You've got to go and let them know what it is, and you got to run for office if you have to, and you've got to get involved in that, or you've got to be out there messaging in a big way, because all this stuff happens locally. And that means owning the mechanisms of elections and so on. All these things can be done. It's a real pain in the butt. Nobody wants to do it. It takes time. It doesn't pay anything. Right? It's unpaid activism because but the payoff is you get to live in the world you want to live in. So either you're going to fight for it or you're not. And then the last thing is having hope. And you got to be long on this country. Like, this country has faced down some incredible difficulties.
Yes.
We fought the biggest military in the history of the world and beat the British, like, on our turf. But, they ran the turf.
That's true.
They set this thing up. There's no plausible reason why Washington and the Army of the Potomac should have been able to win against the British. They were the most, capable military force in the world and projected force across the globe.
Right.
So how did that happen? Because there was an American will And there was a certain righteousness to the cause. At least that's the way we believe it, right? That's why we believe in these founding documents. And they took the Western ideals and they put them into an experiment that has now been able to survive. It doesn't mean it doesn't get trials, but we overcame all kinds of awful things. And so
that is true. I mean, the Kingdom of Great Britain, I mean, that was the American Revolutionary War. And since you said, I'm going to spike, I want to take this minute to read something.
We didn't set this up, but it works.
No, we didn't set it up, but this is really important. I'm going to read it, and hopefully people can hear it. We know this is the central part of the Declaration of Independence, and I'm just going to cut past the, we hold these truths to be self-evident, ... And what it says is that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute, I don't know how to say this word, despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for future security. Despotism means one party has absolute control. That's what that word means. Right?
Yeah, it's analogous with totalitarianism, authoritarianism. People always say, "Oh, the communists are winning." It's like they're not communists; they're authoritarians.
Yeah.
Now that may lead. That's the part of communism that we hate.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it says people will more likely suffer these types of injustices.
I know, right?
And we know that's true.
Yeah.
People are more than happy to sit still. They want comfort. They want Netflix. They want Uber Eats.
I've always said
they
that.
want Amazon. They want the things that come to their home. Look, this is what the Romans did to placate their citizens for a long time. It was known as bread and circuses.
Yes.
As long as you entertain and you feed people, then they will do this. Look, if you want a great example of this, and people in rural America that are ever around an Indian reservation can find this. Now, I worked Indian reservation crimes. Yeah, we are here. I was in New Mexico. I've done it in Montana. I went to school in Oklahoma, and the whole state is now a reservation again, which is funny. But it was the most functional reservation. Oklahoma historically always had the most functional experience of reservation because you never knew you were on a reservation other than a sign said you were. There was the poverty was the living standard was the same because nobody handed anything out, from what I could tell. The expectation was you were still part of this country, so you go get a job, and you may have a tribal traditions that were being maintained, and I think that's fine. That's great. Everybody has traditions for family and history and so on, but what they didn't have was a handout that gave them the bare subsistence without any motivation to go out and achieve anything better. Right. So there's reasons why some of the great native heroes in America lived in Oklahoma, and they didn't come off the Crow Reservation. Nothing against the Crow Reservation, but it's not functional. They didn't come off the Blackfoot Reservation in Montana, which is also not functional. You don't see these people because they didn't have an opportunity to achieve because they were given just enough to subsist, but not enough to thrive. And that's what people are willing to accept right now.
I was once on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and there was a woman running the whole tribe, and I went in her office and spoke to her for quite some time, and she goes, jump in my car, let me show you what the government has done to us. And they're trying to resurrect their heritage and the native heritage. And she goes, let's go down to the local grocery store. There's a semi there right now. I want you to see with your own eyes what they're supposed to give us food. And when we got down there, the truck was full of nothing but alcohol and cigarettes. She goes, that's why my people are dying. That's why they're addicted. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're dependent on the government, and they give us nothing. And it's very real. The crippling, the welfare system, it's all very real. And I believe this too. You've got to get uncomfortable if you want to correct it.
You have to have an experience of discomfort. There's no other way around it.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Look what the government did to us. Okay, fine. No, that's what the government offered to you. So the other piece of this is personal responsibility.
Yes.
And we all used to know that in this country. So I was born in the very early part of the 80s. I remember most of the 80s as a kid because I have a weird memory that goes back like at a time when it shouldn't. And I also have a brother who's 10 years older than me, so I got to experience it. Like I was listening to Van Halen when I was 5. So, I have that in my head. I had a woman actually talk to me in a bar in Kansas City one time. I used to run a bar outside of it. And we're sitting there talking, and she goes, back when we were kids. And it's like, I was 26 years old, and I knew she was in her late 40s. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we don't have a common, but we had a common experience with music and culture because I grew up around it. And my dad very aggressively participated in the culture because he was a news guy. Yeah. So I grew up knowing the stories that people who were 20 years older than me know. So I'm not 60, but I have a lot of things in common with people who are in their 50s and their 60s when it comes to cultural references. And that's kind of funny. But the point is, it's like, you've got to take this responsibility on yourself. You have to be your own first responder. That's number one. Now, rural people know that. People who live in the counties of this country know that you are responsible for your own safety. You're probably going to be your own first responder if you have a car accident. You got to take care of your neighbors, right? If something calls, it's not like the county sheriff has a deputy that's sitting outside of your door. Right. Now, people in cities have a very different experience of that. The more dense the city, the more dense the population of law enforcement, of ambulances, of hospitals, of emergency rooms, and so on. But if you don't know how to stop the bleed, for example, then you're dependent on somebody else coming to save you. And newsflash, if you haven't been watching, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming to save this country unless we do it ourselves. Exactly. So that's the real message: is that take responsibility for your own little corner of it. And I'm, like I said, I'm a Second Amendment guy only because I believe that it's part of being personally responsible for your own safety. I'm carrying a weapon right now. Like, I carry a weapon everywhere I go, wherever I'm legally able to, and sometimes not, because it's my job to protect my family and then also my neighbors. Absolutely. So there's circles of responsibility. We all used to know this sort of thing, right? Correct. We were just talking about neighbors a moment ago. Yeah. Your family's first, sure. That means you got to take care of yourself first too. You got to be fit. You've got to eat well. You've got to, take care of your things so that you're able to take care of the next circle, which is the people that are directly under your roof. Yeah. And then the people that are next to your roof, your neighbors. And then we get bigger and bigger, the more skills you have. Some people only have the resources to take care of themselves. We should understand that. And so that's compassionate ways of looking at this. But it doesn't mean that everybody gets a handout. It means that we know that the government's terrible at doing all the things. Like, they're going to squander our money in administration, not doing the thing that we would do with our money, which is that we would go help our neighbor.
They're like this,
right?
Make it rain.
They do, and they print more, right? Yeah. More and more people, I think, are being aware of that. Even people that would otherwise have been considered on the left or progressive or liberal, because it's a fundamentally illiberal position to take your money and then not do the thing that you hoped you would do. Like, anybody who looks at the way the government works, just imagine: do you want government schools taking care of your kids?
No.
Right? Do you want the DMV raising your child?
No.
Like, the DMV is terrible everywhere, except in Kansas. It's really good in Kansas. But I think it's privatized. I walked in and got a license in 5 minutes. I've never seen anything like that, and that happened 15 years ago. Wow. So there are places where things are done, but who does it? Private companies. Because they're efficient, because they are accountable to a certain amount of profit. We all know that as conservatives. We all know that as people who want to take money and do the thing that we expect to do with it, and then achieve the result. Right. The government is interested in having a jobs program and having people on the dole. Do you know how they talk about domesticating wild pigs? This is going to come back to you, I promise. Do you know how you domesticate wild animals in an easy way?
With food and treats.
With food, with the ability to subsist but not thrive. And so one of the ways that they talked to me about this when I was in Texas, they were like, look, if you want to take wild hogs, which are a nuisance and destroy fields, you could put up a feeder. Deer feeder, like people used to put deer corn in it, let it drop at a regular time, and they'll come up and they'll know when the deer corn comes down. If you want to keep them into a pen, you lay the pen down and let them walk right over the top of it and get the food. After a little while, you can start setting up sections of it, and they won't care because the food's still there and they know, and they've never had any problem with it. The minute they get dependent on that, you can close that gate and they'll never fight you, because they're used to getting the corn. As long as it's there, they're good. If you want to be domesticated, you can be domesticated, but freedom is dangerous, and that's why the government resists strong freedoms. Yeah,
and strong people too.
The fact of the matter is, it's none of their business. The government is only meant to facilitate our liberties, right? It's a mechanism to facilitate and ensure that we all have liberties, and then we have boundaries between each other, because we're not really good at giving our own boundaries. We've ceded to a third party. That's how we don't have fights over territory, and that's how civilization exists. Right. Rural people know that good fences make good neighbors. Why? Because you don't want to argue over the property line. And stealing land is stealing your property and stealing your livelihood. But people who live in cities are much closer to each other. And they need a much more aggressive force because their lines are so much smaller. Their piece of the pie is so much smaller, so they're going to fight over it more. So that's why you seed out a little bit of authority. But if people in cities, who are the big voting blocks that are moving some places like New York City moves all of upstate New York, unfortunately, even though there are freedom-loving people in New York, when you have these tight little areas, they are dictating, right? They are dictating city values on places that are not cities. And if we used to all know that everybody has a different experience because it's not the same to be in Idaho as it is to be in Maryland, or Texas and Montana, even though
Well, let's not even talk about California.
And
It happened here in Arizona this year.
Well, you're getting more Californians everywhere, and they want to vote the same way because they expect to see California. But look, the weather's different in Arizona. It's different in Texas. Yeah. It's not the same place you left.
That's right.
And your money may go further. There's a reason why, because people like it that way. Mm-hmm. So stop voting for people to take your money and do something illogical with it because they're not good at it.
Right.
And we've seen that. So these are some of the things that folks got to look at. What is it? What is the overriding value that they are trying to accomplish? If you don't have focus, then you're chasing that laser beam like a cat.
That's right.
Right? It's like, oh, there's government corruption in the DOJ. Of course there is. Oh, there's wasteful spending in the DOD. Of course there is. All these little things can get you
speak to you're a rising star in media. I know that you've been on Dan Bongino. You're gonna be on Jesse Waters this Saturday. What do you say to a rural community that has one newspaper that is completely owned and biased by a certain entity that is actually the one running this town? Like, how do people get involved on a local level when we've been infiltrated, with what I call mafia mentality?
Sure.
What do you do? What do you do? Just the same as what you just mentioned? Do people just get up and get involved? I mean, how do you get the information? How do you bypass the main source of information?
So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can create an alternative line, right? That's something people have always done. So you either write your own newsletter and you start your distribution the same way that any other newspaper got done.
Yeah.
It starts off from the beginning. But the amazing thing is that publishing is very easy now. It's much cheaper than it ever has been. And you don't even have to spend money on physical publishing because you can start a Substack, right? You can have it distributed online.
Yeah.
And you can have your local contributors who think the way that you do, and they can take photos. Look, it's not without a cost. The cost is your time.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it may not monetize later on. So you have to either take ownership of it, or the other option is you buy that newspaper with a group of your friends, because what's it worth? So these are possibilities as well. People have gone in and said, look, I don't like the way that this media network is doing this thing, so we're going to buy their shows. We're going to buy out all the advertising on it. We're going to put on what we want. And when you're the advertiser, you determine what's there. Yeah. So these are possibilities. Now, is it easy? No, of course not. It's uncomfortable. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's why it's easier to do nothing and complain about it to your friends. And it is to have a coffee group or a knitting circle or a bunch of people that get together and have shots of tequila on Thursday nights like my mom likes to do. And it's like a bunch of 60-year-old ladies that are sitting there having shots and doing line dancing and saying everything's screwed up, but at least we got this. Well, you're the Netflix and Uber Eats crowd then. So you either tolerate what's going on or you step in and deal with the discomfort of changing it. And it is uncomfortable.
Yeah. So it's good that you're encouraging. Let's switch the focus now onto your
I gotta switch my
career.
legs so this one doesn't fall apart.
I know. Mine fell asleep too. But so there's a lot of people that are going to listen to this show that really don't know you. How can people find you, follow you? You've got a podcast. Let's talk about that.
Sure. All right. So people can follow me. My name is Kyle Seraphin, so I just brand with my name. It's very easy. Mm-hmm. I'm on Twitter and True Social at Kyle Seraphin. That's pretty much the only bandwidth I have for social media. I have a Facebook page that gets suspended every 60 days, and then they reinstate it, and they knock me off again. And so I don't put a whole lot on there. I don't even know how to use Facebook anymore. I'll be real. I haven't had social media basically since Mark Zuckerberg required a .edu email address on Facebook, which was when I was in college. That was when it was actually started, the original purpose of Facebook. And I don't have any of that. So I started a podcast because I get the opportunity to talk to certain people. And because of my background as a former FBI agent, as somebody who worked in the intelligence community, as somebody who worked in the military community and law enforcement, I bring on people that know what's wrong, that other people either won't talk to or wouldn't even have access to, because who's going to trust the mainstream media, who's going to trust certain things, or they don't have access to the bigger voices that are good, people like my buddy Dan. And I do call Dan Bongino a friend at this point. Like anybody who texts you back in 5 or 10 minutes is a friend, and
Yeah.
he does, and the guy's super busy, and he keeps track of me. So I bring on people that wouldn't have a voice otherwise. Whistleblowers from DHS, whistleblowers from HHS, people that have seen our government involved in child sex trafficking, which is insane.
Yes.
So that was one we just did this week. That was our Monday episode. I brought on people that are former NSA, retired FBI, people who were whistleblowers in the FBI that got to retire but got crushed and saw their careers go away. Because this has always happened.
Right.
I mean, whistleblowers
Right.
have always been crushed. The difference right now is that there's some voices and there's some willingness to hear it. So
Absolutely.
they can listen to my podcast, which is called Uninventively. It's called The Kyle Seraphin Show. Very easy. If you search me on any of the audio places like Apple or iHeartRadio or Spotify, you type in Kyle, you'll get my name as one of the few results. If you type in Dan Bongino, actually I pop up too, which is really funny. I'm like I'm right next to Dan. I'm right next to Glenn Beck. Any of the people that I've spoken to, I think the algorithm recognizes, so that's pretty fun. And then I'm on Rumble as well, so people can find me on Rumble. Once again, just / Kyle Seraphin. All these things, mostly because I want to give I had hit a spot, not on purpose. I didn't desire this. I wanted to be an FBI agent. I thought I was going to retire from that. I actually told my wife that 7 years ago. It's like, well, now we got the job figured out for the next 20 years, so that's pretty good. Because that's what happens.
Yeah.
You don't take that job and leave, generally speaking.
True.
But I wasn't also going to just roll over and do something that someone told me. The thing that actually really pushed the envelope for me at the Bureau, which is so funny, they wanted me to take a COVID-19 test every 72 hours.
That's crazy.
And my argument back to them was really straightforward. I was like, look, here's the deal. I have a top secret clearance. I have for half a decade at this point. I've been a paramedic for over a decade. How about I just stay home with a box of Kleenex if I have the sniffles? I understand that people don't want to be around people that are wiping their nose and coughing right now because of the fear of this virus. By the way, we all have fit tests and requirements. We're all under a certain age working for the federal government. So we are not in the risk categories. I can do basic math. I took statistics. You can look at it and see that we're not the problem. And yet, okay, I won't go to work. How about that? You can trust me to stay home because you trusted me with the things that we use to compromise other enemy nation states that somebody would torture me for, and I wouldn't give up if I could help it. And the answer was like, no, you have to take a COVID test. It's like, well, I'm not going to. Now what? No. So you have to accept that some of the answers you may have to give to people are no, right? And so that's why there was a weird moment when I popped out, and I went to Dan Bongino, who was a former Secret Service guy. We spoke the same language. We had the same job. He saw different problems within his own agency. That's why we hit it off. Right. And that's why we have such a kinship about it. He's a criminal investigator first. That's why he's a good reporter about things that are going on. That's how he puts the story together. And we just compared notes, and he was like, come on the show, I'll go do it. That launched into a place where people were wanting to hear that. They wanted to know that the FBI wasn't full of all bad people, and it's not. But the agency is trash. They trash their own brand. Right. Imagine if you had a company that made like a salad mix, and then you killed 50 people with E. coli. You couldn't sell, healthy green salad mix anymore. You'd have to rebrand it. You have to shut that company down, probably clean your factory out, burn out all the E. coli, and then open it up again. That's where the FBI is at right now, and half this country knows that because they're marching people who are pro-life activists, in front of their kids with M4s and putting them in a car and then being acquitted. The FBI doesn't lose cases, by the way, in the criminal sphere. Right. The conviction rate is overwhelming. It's shocking to you. And the fact that we are losing, and we being the FBI, is losing high-profile cases, whether it be Mark Houck, the guy that was in Philadelphia that just protected his kid. 20 years ago, people would have been like, why didn't he hit him in the face too? He just pushed him on the ground. The things the man said were horrific. He was provoking a conflict. And I found out, because I interviewed Mark Houck on my show, which is also kind of cool. Mark Houck is like a former collegiate football player, right? Yeah. That is not a small dude. No. 6'2", 220 is what he said he used to play. He's bigger than that now. He's heavier than that, and he's still got all that athleticism, and he's a physical dude. And a 72-year-old man got up in his son's face, who was 12 years old, and decided to badmouth him. You're still alive, guy. So when we see that world, people want to hear these stories. They look at a DOJ that's weaponized and see these kind of things, right? So that's why people were so interested. It's like we're seeing DOJ lose cases, Gretchen Whitmer being another one. Oh, yeah. They're like, the FBI doesn't lose those types of cases. Well, they're losing them because regional people look at it and go, no more.
I listened to a podcast from January 26th, I think, on your show with Steve Friend, right? Another awesome FBI whistleblower. January 6th, what a joke. They typically, the FBI, when they have a case, they open up one case. But instead of doing that, they opened up cases on hundreds of people, which is very odd.
Well, there's two ways they could have done it.
Yeah.
And Steve articulates this very well. This was his complaint. What's interesting is the guy I brought up earlier too, Garrett O'Boyle, who's my buddy. He had the same problem in Wichita. Totally unrelated field office. We none of us had ever met before. Garrett had one case on 4 people. Imagine a bank robbery conspiracy.
Yes.
Okay. So you got the guy who's going to carry the gun and wears the mask in the bag. You got the driver. You got the guy who understands the alarm system, and then you got somebody who procured all the equipment. That's your conspiracy. That's your thing. Normally, what you do is you say there's a bank robbery. That's the event. We have one case, and there are 4 co-conspirators. Mm-hmm. So you would have one case. What they said is open a case on each one of these people, because then you have 4 cases. Now that's allowed. That has to be run out of that field office where all the 4 people are. Mm-hmm. What the Bureau did was said, here was one event, a Black Swan event, January 6th. It's a single instance of what they're calling domestic terrorism. I don't want to concede that point, but let's say that's true. You have one domestic terrorism case with a bunch of sub-files, which is what we call them, on individual actors that were there, that did criminal activity. Mm-hmm. They could run that out of Washington. That's one option. The other option is they can send out leads saying we've identified that Deborah is in fact a dirty co-conspirator in the overthrowing of the United States government. So Arizona, Phoenix office, you check into her. And they would decide whether or not they were going to open the case on you or not, whether there was enough predication, and whether or not they were going to pursue it, and then the local attorneys would decide. What they're doing that's wrong is they said, okay, Deborah's a dirty co-conspirator, and we're going to tell you what to do on the case, and we're going to prosecute it out of D.C. This is very immoral, and it also says, instead of having this one event, now we have 2,000. Look how much domestic terrorism there is. Give us more dollars, Congress.
Oh, God.
It's all about money.
It's all about money.
It's always about money. It's either about money, it's people's personal price, it's their personal pleasure, it's their personal power. They're working on 3 things. It's the basics of corruption. It's not some cigar smoking guys in the back room like the X-Files, which I always tell people. I never saw that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist somewhere. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
It's people who are like, if I do what I'm told, then I will promote to the next level, and I will add $3,000 to my pension every year when I retire. And they're willing to sell their souls for that. And what a sad thing to find out that your honor is worth $175 grand a year.
It's all about integrity. So for them, it's about the money. For us, it's about personal integrity and drawing, like you said, drawing the line in the sand. Is there any questions, Cameron? Or?
No questions at this time.
None at this time. Okay. Is there anything specific that you want to talk about that, like, from my perspective, wanting to know about you? I mean, I like to know about the sacrifice, because I think if people get to comfortable understanding that whatever they choose to stand for is gonna cost you, can you talk about the fact that what the FBI has done has cost you a paycheck for over 10 months, and what it's costing other people who are whistleblowers? I mean, you talked about crushing people. How are they attempting to crush people like you?
First, they want to scare you. That's part one. Okay. The threat of them coming after you. So the possibility of somebody coming and kicking down a door that I live in is a real possibility at any time. So people say, "Oh, are you worried about your physical safety?" No, but that's not because that's not a real concern. Yeah. It's because I can't focus on that concern, because then I couldn't do anything else. True. So you have to accept the prioritization of threats, and then what is the matrix of what's more important. It's more important that my children live in a free society than the FBI taking down their door. If they want to come after me, it's look, the allegories that we have in our society are great. You can go all the way back to the 70s Star Wars. Sure. You strike down Obi-Wan Kenobi, what does he do? He becomes more powerful, right? So you want to come after me for the things that I'm saying that are objectively, obviously true to people who work inside the FBI, which is why they've been coming to me with things. If that's the case, then all you're going to do is prove me that I'm right, and that's okay. Like, I went to SEER school when I was in the Air Force. I actually trained for a lot of this stuff. I didn't know that I was trained for that. Mm-hmm. God puts you in a place where you belong, whether you know it or not. Right. And I grew up around radio stations because my dad has been in broadcast media for 40 years. I never wanted to be in the media. I had zero interest in it. I wanted to be an FBI agent. And before that, I wanted to be in the military. And I did both those things. Right. That wasn't the plan. So I'm on the train, I'm not driving the train. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not laying the track either. The track is somewhere. It's like I'm somewhere in the back car. My job is just to stay on the train and make sure my kids don't fall out the window. Yeah. And so I'm doing that. And I'm just trying to be patient enough to let that happen. So let's talk about personal costs. I'm going to work backwards.
Sure.
A friend of mine named Bob Stewart, he was the chief division counsel of the Kansas City field office. Okay, the top lawyer who calls balls and strikes. He did it for over 11 years.
Okay.
He had 27 plus years of government service, unblemished record. Okay, he's 95 days away from retirement. They just walked him out 2 days ago because he was talking to me. No credible allegation he's done anything wrong. But he's friends with Kyle Seraphin, so that's the cost. So he got thrown out. Now, hopefully, he gets his pension, instated, and he's able to retire retroactively, which may happen. But the possibility is that his unblemished record now he has to fight for his pension. Possibility. That's number one. Let's move to me. My situation. I had my paycheck suspended. I had a mortgage. I had bills. I have all the regular things. My wife and I live debt free, with the exception of a mortgage, on purpose. Why? Because if you have a lot of bills, you're a national security risk when you have a top secret clearance. So I didn't allow that to be part of my life. I put money away. We sold the house to be able to take down our monthly cost. We had some passive income streams that we had generated because we put money away for that. So we weren't going to starve. But I'm living in free space because I'm living with my parents at 41 years old with a full family. So that's a cost.
Yes.
Okay, and then let's go to the highest cost that we had. My other buddy, Garrett O'Boyle, he exposed the things that I had already done, but I got kicked out of the office. I didn't have access to the systems anymore. He continued to do the work, knowing that I'd gotten suspended for it.
Okay.
Okay. He went out for a team that the two of us were going to go. We actually thought we were going to be able to live together in houses next door and be buddies. And we had talked over through a signal group, an encrypted app, and we were going to try out for this surveillance team, of which I would have gotten picked up for, and he did get picked up for. So he got orders to move to DC to go and do a surveillance mission, which would have been really interesting for both of us. They gave him orders to sell his house. He sold his house. They told him to move into temporary housing while he was moving out there because his report date was later. He did. His wife had their fourth baby. His oldest is like 8 years old with a newborn baby. 2 weeks after the baby is born, he goes to report to his new office. They suspended him indefinitely for something that he didn't do because I know he didn't do it because I know who did what they asked. And what he did was morally right and possibly outside of policy, but morally accurate. It was the right thing to do. So he got suspended for something that they don't even have any proof he did because he didn't do it. I know for a fact. I will 100% swear to that. And so he lost everything. He lost his home because he'd already sold it. They took all of his stuff because the government moving company took it. They locked it up in Virginia where he was supposed to move. And his family is now houseless without all of his stuff. And they sold at a good price, but they sold their house where they had a mortgage that was very affordable for a long time. He ended up renting a house, not where they had lived, up where his family was, paying twice in rent what he was paying for his mortgage. And I had to pull money out of our GoFundMe, and we spent $10,000 out of that. I just send him money every week from the GoFundMe because that's what it's for. And we've been funding it. He had to spend 10 grand to go get his own personal equipment, his own workout gear, and his kids' clothing and their winter jackets because they didn't have any of this because they live in Wisconsin now. That's what it looks like. That's what extortion looks like. So Cash Patel, Cash Patel has a statement. And people who know Cash, he worked under the Trump administration. He's been a friend of ours, mine and the other guys that we're talking about here, because he just said, "How can we help you? Like, can we, do you want paid for a lawyer?" He said, "Never mind. Let's just go out there and make sure that you guys don't fall out of the media spotlight because we have to keep attention on this. And if it's financial help that we can help you with, paying your bills and making sure you can feed your kids because your income is gone, then we're going to try to help you with that." And he's been great.
That's
and
wonderful.
asked nothing for it. And I've never publicly acknowledged that he's given us anything because he said, "Don't worry about it. Like, I'm not asking for publicity. I'm asking to help you."
Right.
So they just got outed in this news piece that he gave them $5,000 at Christmas because he has a foundation called Fight with Cash. And Cash Patel went out there and shared this shared this money with these guys. No strings, no disclosure, no publicity, no photo shooting big check. Just doing the right thing because he's a good guy. Asked nothing in return. Zero.
So Fight for Cash. Fight with Cash. That's an app that people can donate to support guys like you?
It's a 501c3 foundation. He helps whistleblowers, that people who've been wronged by the government, because he knows what that looks like. He's got some big donors that put money in and they raise on a small scale. They sell merchandise and stuff too. But Fight with Cash is big. It's like there's actually a hashtag on True Social all the time. It's at Fight with Cash, so FWK. Cash Patel's his name is obviously spelled with K, K-A-S-H. Okay. So Cash is, his foundation is out of Virginia, I believe, and they invited me to a banquet, but I didn't want to spend money to fly out there. It seemed like a waste of the money, so I'm missing out on it. But they raise money from donors to be able to help people that are just dealing with government malfeasance, we'll call it. And so they helped out Garrett with no request for anything because it's literally a nonprofit that does what it says. It's just there to help people.
That's good to know because I've always been concerned. It's just so wrong, the hypocrisy and that they're so corrupted. And I just want to encourage people to go back, read the Declaration of Independence. We the people, we own this government. It's not the other way around. And they have turned into nothing but bullies.
It's the nature. So the reason why I brought up Cash is he's writing a book, or he wrote a book already, and it's waiting for approval, and it's called Government Gangsters. And a lot of the techniques that are used by the administrative state, which is to say, the deep state is really a silly name. That's theatrical. It's administrative state. Yeah. It's a bunch of people that are advancing their own interests and the interests of their agency, which are their own interests, at the cost of what? Not them.
Exactly.
But everybody else, the so-called we the people group. So, and there's no reason why our government should be the biggest employer in this country.
I agree.
It's absurd. But
and local governments too.
They're all on the same
they're
team. They're all suckling at this printed money.
I know, at the taxpayer money. So, oh my gosh, this has been so good.
We have one question actually. So, do you know the charter of Congress that created the FBI and what year?
Yeah, so it doesn't exist. Obviously, people know this. Like the fact of the matter is Hoover was sort of a gangster in and of himself. The FBI has obviously committed crimes against the American people since its inception. But I think the problem that most people are dealing with, and this is the difficulty of it, the FBI has historically aligned in value and in practice mostly with most of the country when you look at the American values. Mm-hmm. So did they go after communists in a way that was immoral or unethical or possibly illegal? Yeah, they did. But did most people in America sort of sympathize with that? They did. So they tolerated this sort of thing. These sort of things happened because we allowed it, because that's what people more or less want. And most of the FBI did the thing that you'd expect, which is going after people who committed federal crimes. But none of these things are, the problem with that question, and I get it sometimes, and people make statements about, the charter of the NSA, the charter of the CIA, the charter of the FBI. Mm-hmm. Look, it doesn't make a difference when they show up at your door. So I had a lady say, well, you could just tell them that their search warrant is not authorized. And I'm like, they have battering rams. They're coming through your door. They have handcuffs. They're going to put you in them. They're going to take you to a magistrate judge. They're going to, read the charges, and then you're going to go sit in jail with the United States Marshal Service. I don't want to tell people that they're not right, because I'm sure they are right on a factual basis. But in practicality, that is not the way that you overcome the FBI. The way you overcome the FBI is you get your elected representatives to pull funding from programs that are illegal, immoral, and unethical, which is going to be mostly intelligence stuff. That has to be done. It has to be done, because we're not going to just be able to you don't get to not acknowledge their existence and think that they go away. They don't go away. There's a bunch of people that work there. There's 37,000 employees, or 38,000 employees. They're going to keep being the FBI, unfortunately. So, charter or not, they're there. They've got buildings. They've got guns. They've got body armor. They have badges. People generally acknowledge they're real because they're real, and then they come after you. So we can't. That's one of those laser beams that we're getting distracted by. The minutia of it is just because something shouldn't be there doesn't mean that it's not. Yeah. And it's like, well, you're not allowed to build a strip club right next to my house, but there's neon lights in my bedroom, so it's there. So we got to deal with that, the reality of it. Yes.
So 1 minute.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. God, I wish we could just talk for days. You're a fascinating man. Thank you so much for being so brave, and I hope your courage inspires other people to be courage, because that's the bottom line. That if we know that we're not alone and we're not going to allow them to isolate us anymore, then we can band together and fight the good fight. Because you're right about bringing the spiritual realm, and I tell people all the time, read Ephesians in the Bible, Ephesians 6:10-18. Understand that we're not fighting against each other, and that's exactly what they want. They want division. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this age, and against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places.
It's true.
So the battle is not between you and I, or us and the government. The battle is a spiritual, demonic battle, and a lot of people have to just come to grips with that first. If you don't, you will fight for the wrong reasons.
That's it.
And our faith has to be in God. It can't be in this world. This world system is just horrible, and we need to band together and fight the good fight. So, in closing, tell people once again what show you're coming up on. Jesse Waters' show, right? This Saturday night.
Probably tonight, actually.
Oh, probably tonight.
I think they might shoot. Yeah, Jesse Waters tonight, and then I'll be on Unfiltered tomorrow with Dan Bongino for a few minutes, and You know, I'm occasionally on Fox. They can always find me every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on my podcast.
Okay.
Mondays, if you're only going to listen to one of them, download our Monday shows. They go 90 minutes to 2 hours or 3 hours. We just talk as long as it takes, and you can download it and listen on your long drive on any given part of the week, and hear some stories that you won't hear anywhere else. And I'm fairly good at asking people questions. I'm pretty good at talking too, it turns out. But
yeah, you're very good at
but I spend a lot of time both as a paramedic and as an investigator getting to the truth of the matter and getting people to tell me the thing that I need them to tell me for their sake, not for my sake.
Yeah.
And I think people will hear those things and know, like, we're getting other people's stories in a way that's palatable and that are important. I think
absolutely. And what people can do is also pray for you, pray for your family,
Please.
pray for other whistleblowers, pray for God to protect you. And you know, locally, your dad, we've skirted around the issue of your dad. Your dad is a wonderful human being. And if you don't know, Charlie Seraphin, you've got to listen to K-Mog. He's on every morning, 9 to 10. On Fridays, he's got a special show that he kind of takes off and he runs with. He's got a lot of experience. He was one of the negotiators at Waco, which is, we just passed the 30-year anniversary. So you come from good
Interesting stock.
Very interesting stock. So locally, follow Charlie, follow Kyle. There is a newspaper, and this time the lady's waiting to interview you right now. Just so you know, Payson Roundup isn't the only game in town now. It's called the Payson News. And if you want a subscription, it's digital. Go to savepaysonaz.com, $20. You'll get 2 newspapers a month. And we need to start supporting grassroots people who are trying to affect change. So, having said that, I want to thank you for joining us. This has been a remarkable show. God bless you, man. I'm so thank you for what you do. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. And have a great day. Please share this show. Get this show in front of as many people as you can. This is revolutionary stuff. And it's time for a revolution, people. Don't forget to read your Declaration of Independence. Have a great day.